So what about our position is not in accordance with reason or logic?
Well, I was going to say, if you just simply have a lack of belief in God, then you don't even need to require any reason and logic for doing that. You could, as I said, if that's the negative definition, then my simple argument is there's no reason or logic required to be an atheist simply based on that weak definition. Now, in Tom's case.
Well, so I think that means you're admitting that that definition is rational when you say that.
Yeah, I think saying lack of belief in the existence of God or gods, that definition would require no rationality. So yeah, in that case, that would be a rational statement.
Okay.
Well, no. So let's get something straight here. Atheism is just, is just saying no, I don't believe in a God, right? So I don't think that atheism itself can be rational or irrational. It's about how a person comes to that conclusion. So my question is that from both T-Jump and I, what about our reasoning is irrational? Because we're both coming at it from different perspectives. I'm more of an agnostic atheist. He's coming at it from more of a gnostic atheist point of view. So is there any particular thing that is irrational or illogical about either of our reasons for not believing in a God?
I would say, in a sense, it would be a lack of a falsification criteria. I mean, Tom Jump, I actually just recently watched a debate that you had with a philosopher who challenged you on this. You said that there are no good reasons to believe in God. So it sounds like you basically just said that you don't think that we can ever know if God exists. And if that's the case, then you're not taking an atheistic position. You're saying you don't think God can ever be known.
No, straw man, I never said that. So my position is it's really easy to show God exists. If I pray for God and get a gold brick, that's evidence of a God. So I never said you can't know God exists at all. It's not a part of my position. But again, in what I presented in our opening statement, in this debate, what about either of our arguments is not in accordance with reason or logic? You failed to answer that question for the past.
I did. I said a lack of a falsification. If you're going to say that there is no reason to believe in God, first of all, you're talking about something. So I expect you to know what you are talking about, because it's like the
falsification criteria is give me a reason to believe in a God. That's the criteria. And so I literally, in my opening, I said you need a method to differentiate imagination from reality. If you give me that method and it passes the test, that is a falsification of there's no reason, because then there is a reason. So what? No,
but I'm challenging your statement of what you are saying is rational or not. It is you not making something very clear about what would convince you that there is a God. Making broad statements like, well, I don't see evidence, I don't see reason.
I literally answered that. I literally answered that in the beginning. You need to provide a method to differentiate imagination from reality. I don't need to tell you what the method is. You need to tell me what the method is. Then I can evaluate the method to see if you're right or not. Any scientific method we already have, that would work fine. So testable predictions is great. That would work as a falsification. You still have not answered anything in our question. What in our logic is not in accordance with reason or logic? Like, yes, there is a falsification method. I literally gave it. Just testable predictions work fine, or you can provide a different method. Either of those work. Tell me what in our reasoning is not in accordance with logic.
Were any of y'all theists or Christians before you became atheists?
Yes, but that doesn't have anything to do with our opening.
Okay, so that would not, atheism wouldn't be your default position then.
What does that have to do with our opening? What in that is not
because you didn't really explain in your opening why you were an atheist.
But that doesn't matter.
In order for me to find out whether your reasons are logical, I would need to know your personal process in which you left your theism to become an atheist.
No, we gave you the reasons in the opening. We said there is no evidence. That is the reason. That is the reason that we are giving to support our atheism, not our personal.
Yeah, that's a very generic term.
So let me explain what I'm trying to say. So you're saying there is no good reason to believe in God. Okay, so you are making a statement of things that you are talking about within that statement. So you're talking about evidence.
Clarify. Yes. So, there's that meme where Steven Crowder is on a desk and it says some provocative statement, prove me wrong.
Yeah, to change my mind. Yeah.
The point of my saying there is no reason or there is no evidence of a God is a strong positive claim. just to open the conversation so someone can then present one. I'm not literally making the ontological claim. There is literally no evidence, because obviously I don't literally know everything. It's simply a provocative claim in order to start a conversation. My actual argument was literally what I said in the opening. You need to provide a way to differentiate imagination from reality, and you haven't done so.
Okay, but we're talking about.
I don't think this is about us needing to do anything. The atheism is kind of on the fence here, not theism. So so I don't know where you're getting that we need to provide anything.
So the reason I am an atheist, as I presented in my debate, is because there is no evidence to indicate the existence of a God. Because in order for anything to be reasonable to believe, you need to show that it isn't imaginary. So if you don't have a way to show it's not imaginary, then it's reasonable to conclude it's imaginary. So until you provide evidence, I am rational to conclude the hypothesis of a God is imaginary and does not exist.
Get to the point of you guys making an argument for God and then telling us why we are irrational for not accepting that argument as proof that God exists. Maybe that can get us moving in a direction in this conversation, because we're just literally arguing about definitions and things that are just not showing us how we're irrational for not believing in a God.
Well, the only problem I would have with that is because when we come to this debate, y'all were already atheists beforehand. So I don't think we need to provide an argument as to why God exists for y'all to tell us why that's irrational. No, I don't.
No.
This is,
right.
no, this is.
Matt, you're right. So you're right that you are not required to provide an argument for God, because the topic of the debate is atheism rational? And so when we are addressing is atheism rational, the reason it's rational, the reason it's in accordance with reason and logic, is because of a reason. And that reason is the fact that there is no evidence. If there is no evidence for an object existing, then it is rational and in accordance with reason to think it's imaginary or to lack belief in it. Therefore, atheism is rational. And so for atheism to be irrational, there would need to be a reason to believe in this thing. Does that make sense?
Well, and that kind of goes to my point of bringing up, make an argument for God, because, you need, I feel like you need to tell us why we're irrational for not believing in God. And the reason why we don't believe in God is because there's no supporting evidence to suggest that a God exists. So it kind of feels like it depends on the argument that you present to us as to whether or not we're being irrational. And I don't know, that's kind of how I see it. I feel like you guys need to provide evidence that this God exists, because atheism or being secular or just being irregardless of any kind of knowledge of God or any kind of concept of God is the null hypothesis. It's the default position. So, I feel like in order to convince somebody that a God does exist, you guys need to provide a piece of evidence that shows that God exists. And then you need to tell us how we're being irrational in rejecting that evidence as God existing.
So just use an analogy, is it rational to believe the world is not flat? Well, yes. Well, why? Because there's lots of evidence the world is round. So because there's lots of evidence the world is round, it is rational to conclude the world is not flat. So if there's lots of evidence to conclude a God exists, then it would be irrational to be an atheist. But if there's no evidence that there's a God exists, then it's rational to be an atheist.
Okay, yeah, and this is, I'm glad you used that, because this is kind of an analogy that I used. If someone is a flat earther, despite the evidence, and the response to the proposition that the earth is round is, I'm not convinced the earth is round, that's what I'm trying to hit at. When your default response is, I'm not convinced in X, again, all you're telling me is your psychological state. You're not examining the evidence itself necessarily. You're just saying, you're just like I was saying, you're just telling me what your psychological state is.
That's totally fine.
Reason in and of itself.
That's irrational.
We're literally asking you for the evidence, though.
Well, I understand his point.
Let them cross-examine.
Right, and so I guess that's what I'm trying to get. That's what I'm trying to extract from trying to ask for what would convince you. Because when you just say a lack of evidence, I don't know what that means. Evidence could be a lot of things, and when you just simply say a lack of evidence, And then you say, well, a rational mind wouldn't reject rational evidence. Well, who gets to first of all decide what rational evidence is?
Every criterion of evidence we've ever used in science ever, just anything we've ever used or anything you can introduce that works. This is literally, there's no limits here. Anything that you can use that can differentiate imagination from reality is evidence. Do it. I don't care anything.
Right. So empirical evidence would be a really good start for evidence that God exists. But okay, so let's just take my position in particular and the reasons why I am an atheist. Okay, let's just go with one of the reasons. That reason being, we have all of these other definitions of gods in the past that establishes a prior probability of any future any future definition of a god, which would include the Judeo-Christian God or just any Abrahamic definition of a god. The probability that God is the correct version of God is pretty low. Because of the prior probability that's already been established. Now, when you add on to the fact that like nothing in the Bible corresponds to reality, there's the Bible is not history and it misrepresents history in reality. When you add all those things onto it, you have to have really good, solid evidence to overcome all of that evidence, right, against the fact that Christianity represents the one true God. So this is an argument against a specific definition of God, obviously. But considering that you both of you guys are Christians, I would think that this is a really good first step in showing how we're irrational. So using that reason right there, the fact that the prior probability of any man-made definition of God being the true definition of God, and there not being compelling empirical evidence that can overcome that prior probability, what makes that irrational?
Well, I would first of all say that. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say a few things here. The laws of logic, orderly nature of the external world, the reliability of cognitive faculties in knowing the world, the importance of inductive reasoning.
Could you slow down a little bit? Matt, say those a little slower so I can type them out.
Yeah, the laws of logic, the orderly nature of the external world, reliability of cognitive faculties in knowing the world, the importance of inductive reasoning, and objective moral values, all that are used in science and are important to science. And William Lane Craig pointed out that in the second half of the 20th century, philosophers of science first started realizing that this cannot even be demonstrated by science, but are actually assumptions that science starts out with that are guaranteed by the Christian worldview that can be backed up by Scripture. So in my case, I think it's a whole lot more rational to be a Christian, to be a theist, than to be an atheist, because I don't think atheism can guarantee any of that.
So your argument is that science can't answer these questions. Your God hypothesis can, therefore your God hypothesis is more reasonable. Is that?
No, my argument is science takes the assumptions that these exist at the beginning without even demonstrating it in order to conduct science and in order to do everything we know. We assume these things exist at the start. Our first thought process is an assumption that these things exist.
So science assumes these exist. My God does not assume these things exist. Therefore, God is a better explanation. Is that your argument?
No, what I'm saying is the Bible teaches that these things exist and they come from God.
Okay, so science assumes they exist. The Bible teaches they exist from God, therefore God. Is that your argument?
Yes, essentially. I mean, okay, it's more rational than an atheistic position because you can't assume those exist from an atheistic worldview.
That's called an argument from ignorance fallacy. It's literally one of the things we know for a fact does not work.
Yeah. See, here's the.
Hold on. Hold on. I would also say that we can empirically and scientifically explain why morals exist. We can empirically and scientifically explain why logic exists, because logic is a human description of things that we have perceived in our reality. Morals are also something that we have developed ourselves, and it is an abstract concept that we have developed, not some absolute God figure, which we don't have any evidence that some God figure has developed those morals, especially considering the fact that even within your Bible, your morals have changed.
David, you asked specifically for something falsifiable or something that you wanted to know their particular position. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said something to the effect of, if God created a gold brick, we prayed and God created a gold brick. And then John, you gave 2 or 3 things. So can we deal with those? Because you asked for that and then they gave that. Can we address why those are irrational?
Oh yeah. So
does that sound?
To clarify, he specifically asked what would count as evidence, and my answer is anything that can differentiate imagination from reality is evidence. One of those methods is science, testable predictions. If he can provide any other method that can do that, that would work too. But anything that can differentiate imagination from reality and indicates God would be evidence of a God.
Sure. And what I'm trying to highlight in this is that if you were to say the same thing about something like a unicorn or the flying spaghetti monster, you would say there is no evidence for the flying spaghetti monster unicorns, but you would be able to tell me, based on what you know about this thing, what would constitute evidence. For example, fossils of...
Yeah, Josh gave that example.
I feel like they were fairly specific in answering that. So like John, and again, correct me if I'm misremembering, but you said things like... historical inaccuracies or something in the biblical text. And again, Tom said something about, here's something specific thing that's falsifiable. If we prayed and God created a gold brick in front of me and we could repeat that, that would be good evidence. How would you deal with those specific things?
Right. So that what I'm trying to find out what he means by God. Is it a personal being? Is it the thing that caused the universe to exist? Is it the thing that's responsible for morals? Is it all of the above? What do you mean when you say God? Something that does whatever you want it to do? Is that how you're defining God?
Well, so we're not the ones defining God here. You guys have the specific definition of God. Like, at the very least, I'm agnostic on, a deistic type of God, a God that just exists outside of this reality, and we will never know that he does or does not exist. We're not the ones with the specific definition of God. You guys have the specific definition of God, which is what our arguments are ultimately stemming from, because those are the definitions that are currently presented.
I have to give a specific definition because I'm taking the strong atheist position. So my position is that all of the above, any definition of God you want to give, if you can't show it's not imaginary, it's imaginary.
So if I define God as a metaphysical thing, it is the thing that caused the universe to exist. Is that evidence for God then, in your opinion?
No.
If I say God is the thing that started the universe, that caused the universe to exist.
No, that's
not. Can you prove that?
No, so that's your definition. You've given a definition.
I'm asking, is it possible? Because you're saying there is no evidence. So if I can show that it's possible that the evidence fits the conclusion through induction that it was God, then the statement that there is no evidence for God is nullified, and you can't make that statement anymore.
No, that's not evidence of a God. So that would be post hoc reasoning. Post hoc reasoning is when you look at a body of evidence and then you make a hypothesis to fit the evidence. That is not evidence. That's literally called post hoc theorization. It is abductive reasoning, which is also known as affirming the consequent fallacy, introduced by logic by Charles L. Pierce. Those literally are not evidence. You can use them as a basis to come up with a hypothesis, perfectly rational. They are not evidence the hypothesis is true. So no, that is not evidence that it is not imaginary. You have not provided a way to differentiate if it's imaginary from reality. All you did is you came up with an imaginary hypothesis.
So we don't exist, is what you're saying.
No, I never said that.
So I want to actually point out real quick that I find it interesting that the assumption is that I am saying that you guys are irrational. I would actually say that that is evidence that atheists to some degree are being irrational, because I never said that atheism is irrational. I said it depends on the circumstance, and for some reason, the default cognitive response to what I'm saying somehow ends up being that I'm assuming or asserting that you guys are being irrational. So,
no, David. After you started that, I gave you my reason for being an atheist.
Yeah.
And I specifically asked, can you point out the point that I'm being illogical, or the reasons why I'm being illogical, or why my reasoning is flawed? And I have not actually heard an argument against my reason for being an atheist.
Sure. And yeah, I've been responding to Tom Jump. Sorry, let me engage with you. Yeah, sorry.
So what's the title of the debate today?
Is atheism rational? Exactly.
So yeah, by that, then to me, the lack of belief wouldn't require rational thought. So I say it's irrational right off the bat. If it's just a lack of belief, this debate wasn't about whether y'all's position was rational or not. It was about his atheism, right?
Well, okay, but listen, I didn't just say, oh, I don't believe in a God. Right. I gave you a specific step-by-step reasoning for why I don't believe in God. And you guys have really not engaged.
I wouldn't call that a step-by-step reasoning. You said you used to be a Christian or a theist, but you never really explained the process that led you to be an atheist. Because obviously you thought there was evidence for God beforehand.
No,
right? I mean,
I never considered. No, listen. Okay, if you guys want to know my personal story, I grew up in the deep South, the asshole of the Bible Belt. Right? I never questioned whether or not God existed. All right. I was never given that option. I never considered the option of God not existing. Okay. So that was never a thing for me. I grew up knowing, quote unquote, knowing that God existed. I grew up surrounded by people that believed that God existed. And it wasn't until my beliefs were challenged and I carefully considered all of the arguments and all of the quote unquote evidence for God existing that I came to the conclusion that he probably doesn't exist. Okay. And I did give you a step-by-step thing, a very basic layout of why I don't believe in God. And I feel like you guys have not actually engaged with any of that step-by-step reasoning.
If your reason is based on logic, okay, yes, I would say that to that person, their form of atheism is rational, because that's what the definition of rational is. It's based on reason. However, if your reason for not believing in God or maintain, I guess you could say suppressing a belief in God is based on emotional reasons, then the answer is no. Now, I'm not talking about you guys necessarily specifically. We can, but we're talking about the atheism position. So, and this, you can imagine this is probably hard to answer as well, given that you two take different positions on the definition of atheism. Randall Gann gave a different definition. That's kind of part of the problem with some of these debates at times, is that the definition doesn't seem to be too straightforward. So I'm trying to wrestle with what each person means by definition. I have to address each person individually. So my general... Go ahead.
We've took both of the definitions. There's two definitions. One is a lack of belief. One is a rejection. You could just pick either position and say this one is irrational for reason X. And we literally gave both of our justifications for both of those reasons. So you could just, you have a formal argument that I could present to you for either of our positions, and you could just take it apart and say which one of our positions is irrational, which part of this argument does not correlates to reason or logic, and show. So we literally gave you both of our positions. We took both of the definitions of atheism, so you could pick either one you wanted to address and say either one is rational, and then gave you our justifications for those reasons. So you have everything you need. You shouldn't have any problem here. Just pick anything you want in anything we presented. Show what is not in accordance with reason or logic in either of our positions in this debate.
I kind of thought that I had already done that.
Is our versions of atheism, which we're trying to represent the global large position of either lack belief or a rejection, the two most common positions, we're trying to represent the biggest portion of atheism in the world. is our position and our arguments as we presented it rational? That's the point of the debate. So yeah, let's stick with the positions like we presented in our opening. Like show what about our positions is irrational. If
Okay,
our position,
I'll let David. David can have the floor since he wanted to kind of deal with y'all's positions individually.
Yeah, let me start. Is it John? Did I hear it right? Is it John?
Godless engineer, yeah.
Okay, let me answer you now. So okay, based on what you said, so it sounds like basically what you said is that the reason why you kind of either, well, maybe didn't even possibly even have a true belief in God, but you were just around people. But if you did believe that there was a God at your time, and then you were challenged on your beliefs, and then you said, oh, okay, well, these reasons seem more, I guess you could say, real than the reasons that I believe. If your reason, again, because we're talking about, is atheism rational? So if your definition of atheism is as you have described, based on what you said, I would say that for you, yes, your position is rational, because rationality is based on reason. You said that these are the reasons why you don't believe in God. So based on the definition of rationality and reason, for you, I would say that your definition of atheism is rational. And see, this is kind of why I gave the little disclaimer at the beginning that this is kind of a loaded question in a sense, because the title atheism does not have a set standard of what it means to be an atheist. So you have to deal with each person individually.
So I highly disagree with labeling either myself or T-Jump as not real Christians to begin with. I mean,
no, I didn't say that.
No, yes, you did. You said that, you're not a sincere Christian.
No, I said you grew up around Christians, but I said whether or not your belief in God was a true belief. But I'm just giving you the benefit of the doubt. I'm saying, okay, you believed in God. Okay, supposedly, that's you believed in God. So I'm taking you at your word on that. And you're saying the reason why you stopped believing in God is because of these other reasons that were presented to you, correct?
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So based on what the definition of rationality is, which is, I should have pulled up rationality.
With reason or logic.
Thank you. Yes, in accordance with reason or logic, yes, you had reasons. So, like I said, I am not taking a position as a starting point because I already knew this was going to happen. Okay.
But wait, just to clarify, it's not any reason. You can't just say any reason, therefore it's rational. You can have bad reasons which are irrational. So the fact that it's in accordance with a reason doesn't make it rational. It has to be a good reason, a logical reason that.
Right. So if I say, well, my reason for not believing in God is because I hate God for whatever personal reason I have, that would be an irrational reason to not believe in God.
Yes, that's what I was.
I think that I can speak for both T-Jump and myself, is that you should have better reasons not to believe in God than just, I broke my dick one day or something like that. Like, I feel like there should be better reasons to not believe in God than that.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't believe it's real, right, then I think that that's fair. Okay. I don't. You shouldn't believe in something that you don't think is real. Okay, I agree with that. So, yeah. Okay.
So what parts of our position is not in accordance with reason or logic? Either of our positions in this debate, or would you grant that both of our positions are completely rational?
Well, I have a problem with yours, but I think that John's is more rational.